vaccination. And Sabrina will be sharing with us, and then we'll be followed by Nathan, who will introduce once he's ready. I believe in redeeming the time, for the days are evil. So welcome, Sabrina. Please type your questions in the chat, and we will do Q&A after both our speakers have spoken. My name is Andrew Mvujira. I'm a clinical epidemiologist with the Infectious Diseases Institute of Makerere University. I specialize in HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis research with key populations, and I've been doing this research for the last 20 years. So, Sabrina, you're welcome. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, dear brethren, and I hope you're all well. I had a long wait in Nairobi, and so I just came home at around 3 a.m., so I'm a bit groggy, but I hope that I can be able to deliver my talk coherently. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone who has created this opportunity for us to talk about vaccines. I'd just like to summarize our response from the Ministry of Health and WHO to that video that went viral. I was in Kenya the whole of last week, and people were also talking about the video. And that shows how viral videos can be very shocking and you know, disturbing, not only to the intended population, but even people we call the innocent bystanders. So misinformation and anti-vaccination is going to be the world's next big pandemic. As you saw during COVID, there was a lot of misinformation, and this creates a lot of fear and potentiates people's mental illness. The immunization program in Uganda started just after our independence, so it's as old as Uganda. Unfortunately, during the 1970s, the immunization program went down, but continued to, struggle with the 6 immunizable diseases. Today we have 13 molecules, but I want to let you know that in other countries like the US, like Japan, like Canada, they don't have only 13, they have 36 immunizable diseases. And if you do the math, the infant mortality rate of those countries, like Japan, is 0.6 children per 100,000 delivered. That means rarely does a baby die until they reach adulthood. Because they've been vaccinated, they've been protected, the economic rate is high. In Uganda, on the other hand, yes, we've had our vaccination program since 1962. It struggled a little bit, but rose up again with our own president as the champion in 1987. And we struggled to include other vaccines for our population to ensure that children do not die, to ensure that adolescents get the vaccines that other adolescents get all around the world. I was a member of the Uganda National Immunization and Technical Advisory Group from about 2014 to 2022 until we retired off. And people like Professor Nelson Sewankambo, Professor Sarah Chikuli, and others were on this NITAG that advises the Ministry of Health as to which vaccines should be brought in. I'm glad to say that with the expansion of our immunization program, we've seen a lot of successes. In the early 80s, we knew that having a child was not confidence for a parent to bring that child up to the age of an adult, because the infant mortality rate was 152 per 1,000 children. Today, it has reduced by almost 5 times. And we are not yet there. We need to reach the last mile. I've been inspired to talk about a nurse whose picture became viral, a nurse in Butaleja district, who was shown carrying vaccines up a hill, up a ladder that was created by pieces of wood. And she was trying to vaccinate the children in Butaleja district. It is such people who we call our heroes, who ensure that children are vaccinated. And so when we see viral videos like Dr. Wahome, I hope he's actually a doctor, creating fear and misinformation, it makes me sad. It means that our immunization program is going to be hard. Today, we are able to vaccinate children and prevent them from getting pneumonia, meningitis, prevent them from getting cervical cancer later on when they grow up. So we need to be careful with the information. A lot of the things that were said in that Wahome video were actually false, and they've been debunked. I shared with Andrew details of the WHO and Ministry of Health response, and I hope he can share it with everyone who is on this call right now. So I want to say that in the world today, we are aiming to have equal opportunity for survival for every child, and that every child should not only survive, they should thrive and transform their society. And immunization is one of the public health interventions, just like washing hands. And it is important for us to accept that if we immunize our children, we give them a better chance of survival and even thriving. I'm going to stop here for now and allow Dr. Nathan to continue the presentation. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Sabrina, thank you for being present, even though you're quote unquote jet lagged or sleep deprived from your late arrival from Nairobi. We truly appreciate your expertise. I will share the document in the chat shortly. But now I would like to welcome Dr. Nathan Vachaita, who is the World Health Organization representative in Zambia. Nathan is well known to most of us. He's a Focus Associate. He's married to Anne. They have 3 children. Nathan, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I am together with Anne, my dear wife. We are of 32 years, so she's right beside me. Let me try to share my screen. Where is it? Okay, I'm trying to share my screen. Yeah, I think I've found it, which one it is. You can see my screen?
Confirmed. Just go to presentation mode. And thank you, Anne, for being together with Nathan.
You can see my screen?
Yes, good to go.
Okay, so thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you. This is the outline of my presentation. I am going to talk about, I'm going to give an introduction, the history of WHO. I'll spend some time on the governance structure, what we do as WHO, how we are funded, some achievements we've had, and I'll use the example of vaccine development to just illustrate how we work, and then I'll give some perspectives or things to ponder. I think my dear sister Sabrina has talked about the Wahome Ngari video that has talked about vaccines and the pandemic treaty negotiations that put WHO on the spot. There were a lot of interesting things said in that video, some true, some fake, and some really showing that somebody was ignorant of what's happening. So there's been an infodemic of lies that are driven by, some are driven by sheer ignorance that ensued, including recorded briefings to the highest office. I think we all know that. So in this presentation, I was asked to explain what the World Health Organization is, what we do, some of the milestones, and also to try and illustrate what we do using vaccine development as an example. My desired outcome here is that we have better informed Christians, because we need to take note that when you transmit a lie arising from ignorance or intellectual laziness, it's still a lie. What do I mean by intellectual laziness? Some information is passed on to you and you don't even bother to check it and transmit and explain, oh my, they're at us again. I call that intellectual laziness. And it becomes very sad for me when the people doing that are academics in some place. I won't go down the road, but I wonder how you handle your students if you can't investigate such a small thing. I'll leave it there. Now, WHO, where do we come from? So in 1945, after the Second World War, there was a meeting of diplomats in San Francisco, California, who had come together to try and set up the United Nations. But they also realized that the world had grown wide and there was insufficient collaboration between countries to control spread of dangerous diseases. So they felt it was important to set up a global organization overseeing global health. And so that is where the plan for creation of WHO came from. So a team was put together to try and draft a WHO constitution, which in 1946 met in New York and approved that constitution. But also before WHO was set up, they decided that, hey, we need a system that will help us to keep tracking diseases. And so they set up a disease tracking service that was using a telex. I know many people on this forum don't even know what a telex was, but by the time I started working, a telex was still around, but they have disappeared completely. But that was the means of transmitting information. Then in 1948, the WHO Constitution comes into force on 7th April, and that's why we celebrate World Health Day. At that time, the public health challenges that were facing the world included TB, malaria, smallpox, leprosy, yaws, syphilis, and so on, and a few others. So that was the initial focus of that World WHO when it had just been set up. So in 1948, the first World Health Assembly was held, which among other things adopted the International Classification of Disease, ICD-6. Now, why do I bring this? Because as I speak now, we are at ICD-11, meaning that as part of the work that WHO does is that they produce guidance with the information they have at the moment through experts. And as more evidence comes available, we keep updating. So 1948, we're at ICD-6. Now we're at ICD-11. And I'll explain later how some of this worked out. But that is just an illustration that will help debunk some of the fake news we've had. Now, how are we governed? And Andrew warned me that I shouldn't spend too much time on this, but I think it is important in light of what Wahome said. Now, WHO is a member state organization, meaning that the member states, the 194 member states, are the ones who control the work we do. So we as WHO staff are the secretariat of these 194 member states. So because of that, we have some governance structures that determine how we work. We have the World Health Assembly, the Executive Board, which meets at the global level. And then we have at the regions, the regional committees. Now, we are divided into 6 regions. So we have the Africa region, which is most of sub-Saharan Africa. Then we have what we call EMRO, which is East Mediterranean Regional office, which includes the Arab North, basically, and the Middle East countries, minus Israel. Then you have Euro, which is most of Europe, plus Israel. Then you have Southeast Asia. Then we have Western Pacific and the Americas. But let me talk a little bit about the World Health Assembly, because it was just before the World Health Assembly that Dr. Wahome Ngari decided to go and brief the president about what is about to happen. So the World Health Assembly is the decision-making body of WHO. It is attended by delegations from all WHO member states and focuses on a specific health agenda prepared by the executive board. The main functions of that assembly are to determine the policies of the organization, appoint the director general, supervise financial policies, and review and approve the proposed program budget. The WHO is held annually in Geneva, Switzerland, and it has been meeting since 1948. The only time it did not meet physically was 2020 because of the COVID outbreak. All right, so it has been consistently meeting. Now, the executive board is composed of 34 technically qualified members, and match that, elected for 3-year terms by the World Health Assembly. So every nation, there is a program where they say, for the next executive board, we shall have technically qualified people from these various countries, and the various countries nominate who will be on that board. At one time, Dr. Zaramba was on that executive board, and he was actually the chairman of the executive board when he was the Director General of Health Services. So that keeps rotating. So the point I'm making here is that all our decisions, all our policies are determined by member state bodies like this one. So what happens at the World Health Assembly is this executive board has filtered through what are thought as the global health priorities. Then they order the secretariat, which is us, to prepare technical papers, which are prepared in consultation with experts. They are brought to the executive board. The executive board agrees with that, presents them to the World Health Assembly. The World Health Assembly debates them and then decides that, yes, this is the direction we should go. And some resolutions are developed. And then at the regional committee, what happens is the decision-making body on health policy in the African region. It comprises of all ministers of health, and I want you to mark that, all their representatives from each of the 47 member states in the region. Our main focus in the region is formulating regional policies, supervising the work we do, nominating the regional director for every 5 years, and then the decisions that are made at these committees are transmitted. Now, I want to make one point clear. The Director General is nominated or elected by member states. So for Wahome to say that unelected officials is completely false. Executive members are elected by the member states, again, to be on that board. And at the regional committee, the regional director is elected by those ministers, and then they send their choice to the executive board for the appointment. So WHO, all our top honchos, the DG, the regional directors are elected by the member states. And then first the technocrats like me and others are appointed based on your competences, your qualifications. So I want to make that extremely clear, because part of the falsehood is saying that WHO will dictate. We cannot dictate anything without the executive board, the regional committee, or the World Health Assembly endorsing what is done. Now, if some of the decisions that are made you're not happy about, blame it on your ministers and your technocrats from the countries, because they are part of the decision-making process. So what do we do now that we have put the governance aside? We provide leadership on matters critical to health and engage in partnerships where joint action is needed. So we lead, but we realize that on a particular item, we need academia, we need the media, we need these kind of professions, or even other UN agencies, and we come together and say, okay, how do we solve this problem with these various stakeholders together? But we provide the leadership. Number two, we shape the research agenda and stimulate the generation, translation, and dissemination of valuable knowledge. What do we mean? In the process of leading in health, we discover that there are some things we are not aware of. We don't have sufficient information. And then we list the set of research questions. We sit together with experts and say, what would be the best way to investigate this thing? And then we come up with what we call generic protocols that are shared with various people, various research agencies or research organizations. They do the research. We can pull the results together if the protocol is the same. And based on that, say, this question is what we had, but these are the answers we have got. But also, there may be research that has already been done by other people, and we pick it up, pull it together, and then a group of experts says, based on this research already done, this is the guidance we need on item A, item B, item C, and so on and so forth. Number three, we set norms and standards and promoting and maintaining their implementation. This is what I mean by setting norms and standards. For example, malaria, where I've spent most of my career, one of the norms and standards is to use insecticide-treated nets. So what part of WHO's role is to say, if you are to use an insecticide-treated net, it needs to be this shape, it needs to be this size, it needs to be this color, this is the fabric that it should be used, and these are the insecticides that should be used. This is how long their efficacy lasts, and so on and so forth. And then we promote that use. So we've set the standards of how a net works. So anybody who wants to manufacture a net that will be approved by WHO for other countries to procure must conform to those standards. And then we promote their use and monitor their implementation. So every year, we're able to tell you how much of this is being used, where it's being used, where there are gaps, and so on. So we do that. Then we articulate ethical and evidence-based policy options. That is extremely important. Wahome was making very, very terrible allegations, but we try to be ethical and we try to make evidence-based policy options. Sometimes in the process of doing that, in number 4, we don't have sufficient information. We go with what we have, but as more information comes up, we keep revising, but not as Secretariat on our own, but with this technical group of experts. Then we provide technical support, catalyzing change, building sustainable institutional capacity. That is, I think that is very clear. But most importantly, also, we monitor the health situation and assess health trends. So that's why you see World Health reports every year that tell the world about that. So those are our core functions. Now, but we also do, in order for us to do those those core functions, we have the various staff, people like me, people at headquarters, various departments working on all the priority public health issues in the world. And there are technical people at global, regional, and national level. I happen to work at the national level, and I head the WHO work in Zambia for the last 6.5 years. Now, WHO agenda is, like I've already told, is proposed by those bodies. But at times, when we want to address some of these public health priorities, we do not have capacity in-house, so we hire consultants. At times, we delegate work to regional collaborating centers and collaborators, but this work is supervised by us. Then we also are producing guidelines on every conceivable public health challenge through stringent review of published information by experts, most of whom are non-WHO staff. For example, if we want to make a guideline on vector control of malaria parasites, we'll call together, we'll collect the information that is available, look at the quality of the publications that have been done, call together a technical group, most of whom are non-WHO staff, but are recognized global experts in an area, And then those people will come together and come up with a guideline that is put together, reviewed, and then all agree, this is the guidance that will go. So if you go to our website, there is guidance on every conceivable public health challenge that you can think about. So in fact, everything I'm presenting in these slides is on our website, all right? So that's why I use the word intellectual laziness, because if you went to our website, you would find everything I'm saying here is on our website, by the way. So before DG Tedros makes a declaration regarding an emergency, because that was the debate about the pandemic treaty, we have what we call the IHR, or International Health Regulations Committee of global experts who will sit, review the evidence, and advise the DG about the next course of action in line with the IHR. For example, if DG is to say that COVID-19 is no longer a public health emergency of international concern, that committee must sit. So for Wahome to say that they want WHO to rule the world, it is certainly not true. There is this committee of experts that sit together, who are carefully chosen and recognized global people that make that choice. Now, at the country level where I am, my work is to convene all health stakeholders, provide policy advice to government, and provide targeted technical support depending on the context. So for some countries, we support everything. In some countries, it's just a few areas. So it depends upon the level of development of the health system of that country. That determines what we do or not do. Now, I want to go through some of the public health milestones. I won't go through everything. By the way, these slides will be available. Like I said, this information is available on the website, so you have access to these slides. But some of the key things that happened is 1950, antibiotics had just been discovered, and that was penicillin. And because of WHO's technical advice, production was ramped up. There was increased access to everybody and responsible use. 1952 and 1961, we come up with these polio vaccines. A lot of them we still use now. In 1969, the first international health regulations came up. They were revised in 2005, and the purpose was to work together to prevent and respond to acute public health risks that have potential to spread across borders and threaten people worldwide. All of us have experienced COVID-19, and so part of the IHR was to determine how do we respond collectively as the world when we have a disease of that nature. So because the experiences of COVID-19 showed us that there were gaps in the revised IHR 2005. That is why the IHR was revised in 2024 and approved at the most recent World Health Assembly. However, in the process of revising the IHR, they realized that a separate pandemic treaty was necessary. There were certain things that could not be ensconced under the IHR, and so a separate pandemic treaty has been under negotiation for the last 2 years, and at the recent World Assembly, the countries said we still need to talk, which is okay. I still recall when they were revising the IHR 2005, it took 2 to 3 years for the negotiations to end. So it is very normal that when you're having treaties like that, because I saw some Christians posting on some sites saying, hallelujah, the countries have not approved the pandemic treaty. That hallelujah was too early, it was misplaced, and frankly, based on sheer ignorance of how we work. Then 1974, like my sister Sabrina talked, is when the expanded program on immunization came. I won't say more about that because she's very well spoken about the history of the immunization in our country. Then essential medicines list. Why is this important? There are all sorts of medicines in the world, but WHO has this list that they tell countries that if you have these medicines in your setting, they are effective, they are affordable, they are accessible, they will treat maybe 80% of your condition, so that countries are not misled to buy medicines that if people have come up with but have not been pre-qualified. Of course, a few people who are very unhappy about that, and I'll just say a tongue in cheek. For example, Covidex has never made it on the essential medicines list. I'll park that one there. Then all of us have heard about oral rehydration salts for treatment of diarrhea. It started through that program. And to this day, I can guarantee that everybody on this call has ever taken ORS. That could never have happened if that program had not come up. Smallpox was eradicated through our work. Then right now we're trying to eradicate polio. And of course, when the HIV was discovered in '83, WHO has done a lot of work, which all of you know, and I don't need to go into that. Then 2001 were very instrumental in coming up with the Global Fund. If the Global Fund was not here, we would still be dying of malaria, of HIV, of TB like we used to do. But because of those initiatives led by WHO, working with others, we have a handle over some of diseases. And 2020, of course, we had the COVID-19 outbreak response, where all sorts of things were said and done, but we are still learning and still making progress. And right now the world is free, almost free of COVID-19. Couldn't have been done if we weren't leading from the front to do this. Now, how are we funded? Because this is extremely important. Because it is a member state organization, member states make contributions. Every country has an amount that it is supposed to pay. And then development partners do. Some decide that they think because of their development aid policies in the country, they'll give some money to WHO. Then we have philanthropic organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, fund initiatives like Gavi, like Global Fund, and so on. And then the private sector. But the private sector, we are very particular about which private sector we get money from. And so we have what we call the FENSA rules that govern who in the private sector can give us money. Now, our work, our core work should ideally be funded by member state contributions. However, that money is not enough. So we get a big chunk from donors, some of whom will earmark funds for specific programs, leaving others orphaned. In other words, a donor can come and say, I have this money for the reproductive health program, and these are the things that you should focus on from the WHO plan. A donor will not come and say, I have this plan. No, 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 no. It has to be things that have already been identified by WHO, and the donor says, I would like to invest in that area. But that also means that there are programs that are orphaned. That's why we talk about the neglected tropical diseases. Now, recently, member states agreed to a phased increase in their contributions so that it increases the independence of WHO to be able to say, this is the money I have, and this is where I want to put most of the money based on the priorities that have been identified, discussed by our governance bodies, and approved for us to do. But also recently, we've launched what we call a WHO investment case, meaning giving you reason why you should invest in WHO. And also countries are beginning to pledge, because this will help us to have predictable and flexible funding that we can invest according to our identified priorities, so that we can keep the world safer, as is our mandate. Now, let me just use, I was given 25 minutes. I have used so far 24. Andrew, would I be allowed to reach up to 30? Is that okay?
Carry on, Nathan.
Okay. So let me use the work of vaccine development as an example of how we work. Now, every vaccine goes through extensive and rigorous testing to ensure it is safe before it can be introduced in a country's vaccine program. I think Sabrina just talked about the NITAGs, where you have, I think she talked about Professor Nelson Sewan-Campbell and a few other people on that group, okay, who decide that. Now, each vaccine under development must first undergo screenings and evaluations to determine which antigen should be used to invoke an immune response. Now, this test is done without testing on humans. It's first tested in animals to evaluate its safety and potential to prevent disease. Now, if they find that that vaccine has triggered an immune response, then it will be tested in human clinical trials in 3 phases, and that will be my next slide. Now, during phase 2 and phase 3 trials, there are 3 phases, and I'll elaborate them shortly. The volunteers and the scientists conducting the study are shielded from knowing which volunteers had received the vaccine being tested or the comparator product. In other words, you give some people a comparator product and the other people the potential vaccine. Now, we call this blinding, which is necessary to assure that neither the volunteers nor the scientists are influenced in their assessment of safety or effectiveness by knowing who got which product. In other words, when you are observing these volunteers, you don't know who got which. So you just simply record what you see. Then at the end of the data collection, that is when the results are all finalized, that is when they unblind. That is when they tell you who got what, which got where. This helps not to introduce bias or to miss some of the things that we could have missed, because you say, after all, this one got the vaccine. I don't expect them to have this. I expect them the other. So that is how vaccines are developed. Now, let me talk briefly about the phases. So once a vaccine product, a potential product, and there are very many, by the way, which never make it to the market. There are so many going on. Most of the majority actually never make it to the market. But if one triggers an immune response, it is then tested in human clinical trials in 3 phases. 1, the vaccine is given to a small number of volunteers to assess its safety, confirm it generates an immune response, and also it helps to determine the right dose, okay? It is not like some of you have gone to some of our traditional health practitioners, the Kadomola dynamics. No. No, we have to determine the right dosage. Now, generally in this phase, vaccines are tested in young, healthy adult volunteers. Now, let me make a point here. Most vaccines are developed in the West, in Europe, in America. So they test the initial in this phase on their own people, not our own people. So when I hear people making allegations, they have come to test vaccines on us, that is not true. The initial tests are done on their own people, in young, healthy, adult individual volunteers. I want to make that clear. Phase 2, the vaccine is then given to several hundred volunteers to further assess its safety and ability to generate an immune response. Participants in this phase have the same characteristics, such as age, sex, as the people for whom the vaccine is intended. There are usually multiple trials in this phase to evaluate various age groups and different formulations of the vaccine. There is usually a comparator to determine whether the changes in the vaccinated group are attributed to the vaccine or have happened just by chance. So there are all protocols to do all these things that show you this. Phase 3, the vaccine is next given to thousands of volunteers and compared to a similar group of people who didn't get the vaccine but received a comparator product to determine if the vaccine is effective against the disease it is designed to protect against, and to study its safety in a much larger group of people. Most of the time, the phase 3 trials are conducted across multiple countries and multiple sites within a country to assure the findings of the vaccine performance apply to many different populations. For example, I was part of the team that worked on the malaria vaccine. I was in Kenya at that time, and I helped to prepare Kenya to do this study across multiple countries and multiple sites. Just before the trials started, I was promoted to a WHO representative, and I left Kenya, but I was part of the team that was prepared and was supposed to execute the phase 3 trials. So when Wahome talked about the malaria vaccine, you can imagine how I felt, because I was part of the team that helped to prepare that. And I'm so proud of what has come out of that and its availability for our population. Now, what about our role in deployment? Now, we have a department which helps to determine the vaccine preventable diseases, that guides immunization research and establishing immunization policy. Now, what happens is that when a vaccine goes out, it is rolled out, there's additional research that is needed to find out about its effectiveness and so on. Sometimes you discover many more side effects than you've wanted, and that department is responsible for that. I also want to make it very clear. Research and development of vaccine is by pharmaceutical companies using guidance from WHO. WHO does not develop vaccines. We do not have a factory for vaccines. We do not even procure vaccines. We just guide their development. Now, some philanthropic organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates invest in some of these pharmaceutical companies to help them produce vaccines, but through our guidance. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does not have a vaccine factory. It doesn't produce any, but I'll leave that there. Once a candidate vaccine has gone through the 3 phases, the company submits a dossier to a stringent regulatory authority for approval. Now, there are regulatory authorities in Uganda. We have the National Drug Authority, but there are also those in other countries which have been assessed to and shown to be very, very stringent. They have all the capacity. If one of those has approved something, then that dossier is presented to WHO. WHO reviews the data and said, yeah, we think this can be recommended for use. Now, once that is done, then the National Immunization Technical Advisory Group, the NITAG, which Sabrina talked about in Uganda, and the NDA in Uganda, and other key stakeholders review the recommendations and advise government to deploy or not. So all the 13 vaccines that Sabrina talked about went through this process before they are deployed. So although the pharmaceutical company has produced, WHO has produced, there is this additional layer at the country level which ensures that we will use this vaccine because it will help our people. Then there is continuous monitoring after it has been deployed of safety, efficacy, and effectiveness through its use. We have a pharmacovigilance system which monitors some of the side effects that come out of this. So our role also as WHO, especially for me at the country office, is to make sure that we build the capacity of the country to be able to conduct all these steps. I use some of the money in my office to finance the NITAG meetings. We take them out, we train them. We also train the people from the equivalent of National Drug Authority here is called ZAMRA. We also take them out and train them so that they're able to do all this work at the country level using the guidance and having their own stakeholders making decisions. So having said that, what I've tried to do is to tell you what WHO is, and I hope by now you know what we are not. Number 2, I can say that with the available tools, one can get fairly accurate information about any issue. Here I've talked about AI. Every time people ask me a question and I don't have enough time to address it, I just go to AI and AI will give me a fairly reasonable summary. So we no longer have any excuse for spreading things we've not checked out. In life, there will always be naysayers and detractors motivated by several factors. As a Christian, be wary and don't jump onto the bandwagon spreading things you're not really sure about. Like any other organization, WHO is not perfect, sometimes making decisions on their only available information, but making adjustments later based on new evidence observations. There are times when we have to completely retract guidelines because the new evidence confirms that what we decided to do perhaps was not the right thing. And then, due to the solid governance structures since 1948, policy decisions are approved on behalf of the 194 member states by country delegations. So if those decisions do not satisfy you, remember your country delegation was part of the decision process. So I thank you. God bless you all, and God bless our beloved Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, for that exhaustive, comprehensive overview of the work of the World Health Organization. I thank you and Sabrina for sharing your time. And we now open the webinar for questions. Feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand. Nathan, have you stopped sharing the screen? Yeah, thank you very much, Nathan, for that comprehensive talk. We truly appreciate your in-depth and comprehensive overview of the World Health Organization and its role in global health. And thank you, Sabrina, as well. Feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, or type them in the chat. The session is now open for Q&A. I'll just throw in that I think many people actually did not know a lot about vaccine development, and a lot of these processes came to the fore during COVID. And depending on where people get their information, sometimes people are picking up things that are not true. And since lies spread faster than the truth, we tend sometimes to just run with what our sinful nature sometimes just runs with what is not true. But I think that it's important that we as Bereans search and double check things before we share them on social media. All right. So Sabrina, you've posted a comment. Would you like to say out loud what you've written while we wait for other questions? Fred, your hand's up. Feel free to unmute.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I would like to join in also thanking Nathan and Sabrina. I think these are very good presentations. There's a question that has always lingered in my mind, and something that Nathan was trying to clarify. You know, the testing of the vaccines in different countries and so forth. You know, establishing the efficacy and so forth. When I was in Ivory Coast, I remember one of my staff went to Paris and had their baby delivered there. And when he came back, he told me that, you know, he could not believe the level of medical care that he had in France. He said all the other children, his older children, had been delivered in Ivory Coast, but that one was delivered in France. And he said the vaccinations that they got were so good compared to the vaccinations which were available in Ivory Coast. And he said monitoring, you know, his son over the period of time, he could see that there was a big difference. So the question that I would put to Nathan is there a possibility that the efficacy of vaccines in the developed countries, let me say in the OECD countries, might be higher than sometimes what we have in our third world countries? I know that, you know, we have, for instance, for us, our children we are vaccinated. We went through all the required vaccinations, and they're okay. We've not had, we can't say we have had any problems. But I remember again what that gentleman told me was the quality of the medication that he had when they were in France. He said sometimes in these our countries, the medications are not as efficient as those out there. And I remember a pharmacist friend also one time told us that he used to source his drugs from Germany, the UK and Germany, because it said the drugs that were available on the market here from some other sources were not as efficacious as would be desired. So I don't know whether Nathan could help us understand sometimes what causes that, and if in fact it also might happen in the case of vaccines, the variations in efficacy of these things when you look at the developed countries or the OECD countries and our third world countries. Thank you very much.
Do I proceed, Andrew?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mulalira Fred Kauma. We like calling him Mula. I think the testing of vaccines in many countries and so on is done at the development phase. Once we've agreed that this is a viable vaccine that should be shared with other countries, then different pharmaceutical companies will produce vaccines. Now, the vaccine factor of the world is India. Most of our vaccines come from India, but there is a very, very good system of ensuring that the quality of vaccines that are coming from India are because it's the one that supplies most of our part of the world, are at top quality. So these factories are inspected on a regular basis to make sure that they have certificates of good manufacturing practice, what we call GMP. So it is done. So the vaccines we get that are approved through the NDA, that are approved through Gavi and other people, are top quality vaccines that are comparable to the vaccines everywhere else. Now, the quality, but let me qualify that. The quality is the same at the time of manufacture, maybe during the time of transportation and delivery. But once you get the vaccines into the country, other conditions may determine their efficacy. For example, a vaccine is most of the vaccines are temperature controlled. So of course, if you expose them to temperatures that are beyond what is normal, you have you could compromise their quality. In fact, when we supply vaccines to, say, health facilities and so on, there is a dedicated fridge for vaccines, and we monitor the temperatures. There is a temperature monitor which we can even monitor remotely. If we see that at a certain point the temperature exceeded what was recommended, particular vaccines may actually be taken out and destroyed because we believe that they no longer have the efficacy. So at the point of manufacture, delivery, the quality is exactly the same. And so, but the conditions under which you administer the vaccines can determine whether you maintain that efficacy or not. And we put up a system and to monitor that. And the NDA in Uganda, I'll use that because that's the term you understand, has approved this vaccine through after the dossier has been presented, and the NDA working together with the immunization program, which in Uganda is called UNEPI, have a system that continues to monitor the efficacy, especially the temperature, mostly. But also other studies go on and can reveal that perhaps a vaccine we have been using is not as good as it used to be, and new ones are developed. For example, right now as I speak, we are in Zambia, we're implementing the new oral polio vaccine 2 for type 2. That's the one we're using. We are no longer using the old one because they discovered that this one was better in some instances and had a reduced propensity for mutating and producing paralysis in kids. So we do that all the time. So there's continuous monitoring. And then you made a statement that he thought that the vaccines were good. I am a little bit reluctant to endorse what you just said, Mula, because we cannot base the observations, we cannot use the observations of one person to determine the efficacy of the vaccine. But having said that, the vaccine cocktail you get in France is very different from the vaccine cocktail you get say in Zambia. I will not talk about Uganda. I'm not allowed to talk about, I can only talk about Zambia because that's where I work. Okay, there's a WR in Zambia. So in Uganda, so I can only talk about Zambia. You see, every country will look at the disease burden they have, look at their population, and then make their own decisions about which vaccines to use in their setting. Now, what determines which vaccine you use? It is one, the efficacy, the safety, but also the cost. There are some vaccines that will be extremely good for our setting, given our disease burden, but we cannot afford them under the fiscal restrictions we have in the country. So when you go to France, they will give you vaccines perhaps that will not be in Zambia because they can afford them. And I've also looked at their disease burden and so on. But generally, vaccines at the time of launch, their efficacy is known. But there are other factors like the conditions under which you keep them, how you administer the dose, and things, even giving it to the wrong target group and so on, that can determine their efficacy. But what we can say about what your friend said is that he was very happy with the quality of services. I expect that, but we cannot use that to determine the efficacy from just a single person's observation. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for your detailed answer. So there is a question in the chat about human papilloma virus vaccination. In Uganda, about 7,000 women every year are diagnosed with cancer of the cervix, and of those, about 4,600 die. The reason we vaccinate girls is because this is a vaccine that is proven to prevent cervical cancer. It's a cancer prevention vaccine. Unfortunately, in Christian circles, we tend to get very hung up about anything related to sex, and there's been a lot of misinformation about HPV vaccination. So Sabrina, given your extensive experience in this field, would you like to explain to the whole group what you're writing in the chat about HPV vaccination, and also include the role of HPV vaccination for boys?
Okay. Thank you very much. And I just appreciate Dr. Bachaita for the extensive presentation. It has created a lot of clarity. I've been trying to answer some questions in the chat, but specifically for human papillomavirus vaccine, I know that they started to develop it in the 1970s, and the first dose was given in 2006. So you can imagine a vaccine it's not just developed like how you prepare a cup of tea with a little ginger and some mint on the side. It takes a lot of research and a lot of money. So the HPV vaccine was tried in countries like Australia. Those are the first countries that got the HPV vaccine. And if you look at Australia now, they hardly have any woman dying of cervical cancer. They vaccinate both boys and girls, and their system also looks at screening women who may have any suspicious lesion. So the preferred de facto would be for us to vaccinate both boys and girls, because the HPV vaccine was created as a gender-neutral vaccine. Human papillomaviruses are so many. There are nearly 90 serotypes. But the ones that create or cause cervical cancer are specifically 6 and 18 and 11. And those are included in the quadrivalent vaccine that is given to girls. The reason why Uganda particularly chose to vaccinate girls between 9 and 14 years is because studies showed that the immunogenicity was better in younger girls, but also before the girls become sexually active. We know that the biggest disease burden that is caused by human papillomavirus is cervical cancer, but it doesn't mean that HPV does not infect men. It doesn't mean that HPV does not cause cancer in men. In fact, HPV has been associated with oral cancer, with oropharyngeal cancer, with cancer of the pelvis, with cancer of the anal region. And so that we would have wished for the country to be able to vaccinate both boys and girls, but we come from a poor background. We are one of the poorest, highly indebted countries, and so we need to prioritize the disease burden versus the vaccine that is given. Remember, our vaccines are given through a grant, through Gavi Alliance, and the country eventually has to pay back the grant that is used to vaccinate these girls. I won't go into the details of that, but the HPV vaccine has been shown to be efficacious. Uganda started vaccinating all girls between the age of 10 and 14 in November of 2015, and we've since vaccinated more than 10 million girls. So someone asked a question about the doubts and all that. I think the Ministry of Health has done a really good job educating the public. For us from the academia, we've also done a lot of advocacy. We do have a vaccine comic book that is given to young girls and even young boys to read. The vaccine has been given through schools, through standalone clinics, and even during Child Day class. So if you have any doubts that HPV vaccine doesn't work, look at countries where it has been used extensively and then compare the disease burden of cervical cancer versus no cervical cancer. In countries where we are not yet at speed of vaccinating everyone, of screening people for cervical cancer, of ensuring that people get treated for cervical cancer, we continue to see the mortality rates caused by cervical cancer. If you walk into the Cancer Institute today, you will see that the majority of women suffering from cancer have cervical cancer. And cervical cancer sneaks on you like a thief in the night. You cannot tell if you have it, but if you're not screened, if you are not vaccinated, then people develop things like distended abdomen, bleeding post menopausally, and also having extensive dissemination of the disease, and they die. A woman dies of cervical cancer in Africa every 20 minutes. And that should worry us. It should worry us as Christians. Because if a woman dies, that means children have lost a mother, fathers have lost a wife, and women don't need to die of preventable diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Every one of those 4,600 and it's probably higher Ugandan, our sisters, our mothers, our aunts who die of cervical cancer, each of those is a preventable death. And it is sad that we did not do enough to prevent them. One of the concerns that Christian parents have, or parents in general have, is that if they vaccinate the girls, they'll become more promiscuous. And numerous studies all over the world have shown that that is not true. Vaccinating girls does not make them engage in risky sexual activity. Sabrina, a quick question for you. Would you know where the Ministry of Health debriefed the president regarding Wahome's video?
I do know that there is a high-level attempt to reach the president through the senior management team from the Ministry of Health. So I'm not sure if they've succeeded, but what we have is the WHO brief and the Ministry of Health. So we are still waiting to hear from the senior management team of the ministry, which includes the minister herself, as well as the permanent secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Just to say, we had our girls vaccinated when they were age and have no concerns about the vaccine. George, your hand is up. Please ask a question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sabrina and Nathan, for that excellent presentation. I just had a quick question about the videos we see, for instance, that is it called Pfizer, where they show the man who they say is the MD of that company, and when he's asked whether he's taken a vaccine, he says no. Also, to make a comment about this the data that is collected, that was collected prior to the COVID vaccination. It took about 4 vaccines in vaccinations in Manchester. And prior to entry into the booth, they would ask what your what do they call it? Not nationality, ethnic group you are. White, Caucasian, white, black, African, and so on. And I wondered why that data is collected just before you enter, and whether people actually, they said the vaccine that's administered is the same across the board. Thank you.
So who would like to take that?
I can say really quickly that that's a very funny way to present your question, George, but it's also a good way. Remember, the COVID-19 vaccine was new, and COVID-19 disease was also new. So in giving the vaccines, people needed to collect information. I don't think there was a vaccine for Black people, a vaccine for Caucasians, a vaccine for Asian brothers on the side, because remember that time COVID was a pandemic and an emergency. But every information that was collected, including race, color, age, was important, not only for purposes of research, but also purposes of monitoring the vaccine efficacy. But over to you, Andrew and Nathan.
Nathan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, let me just say quickly that George Nathan Balikowa, I have not seen that Pfizer video, but it's very true that your company may be producing the vaccine and you do not take it. Even as a WHO staff, I know some of my colleagues who chose not to take the vaccine. So it's entirely up to people. Now, in terms of data, I couldn't agree more with my sister Sabrina that you collect information on all these different things. That's how we are able to tell whether there is vaccine hesitancy more in this group or the other. We also know that there's a preponderance of certain effects in different ethnic groups and so on, but you cannot know at the time you've introduced the vaccine unless you've been able to collect all that different information that will later show you maybe in this group it acts this way. Human beings are basically the same, but there are some slight differences that lead to a preponderance of certain diseases among certain groups and the other. For example, we all know or have heard about the fact that cancer of the prostate is more in people of our color than our Caucasian friends, but that information wouldn't have been known if they were not collecting on ethnicity and so on. So whenever you're introducing a new product, you collect this raft of information. You never know whether later you might use it. So, and you don't want to miss that opportunity of collecting it. But the vaccines are the same. But like I said earlier, the conditions under which you store them and administer them can determine the efficacy, but at the time of release, they are always the same. And that's why we have the WHO pre-qualification and also the NDAs and the NITAGs at the country level to determine that that is maintained. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Nathan. I think we also have to admit that we have very strong pre-existing beliefs. Many of us believe that, and not without good cause, that we are being used as guinea pigs. And so we're not very willing to participate in, as Nathan pointed out, phase 1, phase 2 trials. And these are largely done in the global north. But when vaccines are shown to be efficacious, then we want to jump up and say, we want to be first in line to get them. And understandably, they will be given to those who participated in the trial. So I think if we want to promote vaccine equity, think we also need to not wait for other people to be tested on others, and then we want them. We can't always have finished products, but we should get involved in the vaccine development process. We have done this in Uganda for HIV vaccines for nearly 20 years. There was a question in the chat about what is the prospects for an HIV vaccine. Unfortunately, the virus is extremely tricky. It mutates all the time. It has what we call antigenic variation, and has been extremely difficult to develop an HIV vaccine, unlike the miracle we had with COVID, where vaccines are developed in a very short time. So after 40 years of testing, we're essentially back to the drawing board. Most of the major vaccine trials have not shown any effect. And so that challenge continues. But we have very potent antiretroviral drugs. We now know that if you take treatment and your viral load is undetectable, you cannot transmit the virus. Tens of millions of people are living with HIV, including many in our families and in our churches. And so HIV has become a chronic disease, just like hypertension and diabetes, where you can take a pill a day. We're now going to injectable treatments where you can take one injection a month or one injection every 2 months. And so hopefully one day we'll have a vaccine. Until that day, we'll continue to use the tools that we have. All right. Are there any other questions? Feel free to raise your hands or type in the chat.
Okay, while we wait for questions, there was a question about whether the highest office in the land has been debriefed. I and a few other people, I think some of you know Dr. Ambrose Talisuna, myself, and a few other people did write rebuttals to Wahome, but also there was a very comprehensive response compiled by the Ministry of Health, WHO, UNICEF, and other key stakeholders that was signed, that was published in the New Vision. To my understanding, the highest office in the land does scan the newspapers, so most likely saw that, but whether a formal briefing was done, I don't know. And that publication from the New Vision has gone viral around the world, because even it was posted on our WhatsApp group as WHO representatives globally. So it has gone around the world. So I would imagine that if the rest of the world have seen it, I'm sure the highest office in the land has seen it too. But as to whether there has been a formal face-to-face and oral discussion about that, I wouldn't know. But it has gone around the world for sure. But in Zambia, it raised a lot of concern. I had to make sure I share it around. So back to you.
Thank you, Nathan. A question in the chat about vaccine misinformation and getting doubts about vaccines, depending on what you see on the internet. As a general rule of thumb, if you see a video or a post on social media that causes fear or makes you scared, it's probably fake. We serve a God who has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and self-control. God has given us wisdom. He's given us very highly trained people who can give us the correct information. And so I'd like Nathan and Sabrina to talk about, where do we get our information? Why do we believe the things that we do? And who are the trusted sources? Do we just believe, and most of the time the people actually spreading this information have no medical training or more scientific training. At other times, the opposition to vaccines is not actually scientific, it's ideological or political. So can you just talk broadly about vaccine misinformation, especially for Christians? Have we adopted an amen culture too much, where we just say amen to whatever comes from the pulpit without critically, like the Bereans, examining what we're being told? Sabrina, you go first.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really feel that people who push misinformation are creating fear. And many times, if you look at them, they're actually anti-government, anti-progress, and they're just creating doubt in the populace. As Christians, we need to ask God to give us a spirit of discernment and also wisdom. And the wisdom must come from God, but also the wisdom must come from science. I would trust a randomized control trial. I would trust a study that has been done with ethical approval, but I would be hesitant to trust a statement from somebody who says, I feel that, because I feel that is just an opinion. And an opinion of somebody should not waive or change people's thought process until it is turned into a recommended research. So, people like stories of a man beat a dog. But if a dog bites a man, that's regular news. And as the world has continued to be affected by digital media and social media and artificial intelligence, there's a lot of misinformation that comes up. I think the trusted source should be the WHO website, a trusted health provider, and not just wake up and believe sensational news like, oh my God, the Pfizer CEO was interviewed. By the way, some reporters are also just angry and they want to create sensation and pulls to their websites. So be very careful if it sounds too dramatic, if it sounds too dangerous, step back and ask a trusted provider. Thank you.
Let me come in here too. Thank you, Sabrina, for that one. Actually, as a result of false information about vaccines, the term infodemic was coined, meaning false information, an epidemic of false information. Now, I'll turn to who are the trusted sources. Now, the trusted sources, she's talked about the Ministry of Health, WHO, but if you want to know anything about vaccines, these are the places you go to. You go to UNICEF, go to Gavi, go to WHO. American CDC website is really good on information, and the Africa CDC, all right? And then our Ministry of Health websites. If you want to know anything about vaccines, it's there. For me, as a staff of WHO, there is a whole lot of information about everything you need to know about every vaccine in the world on our website. And in fact, you don't even have to go to our website. You just use Google, and Google will lead you to our website, WHO or Gavi or American CDC, any of those three, and you'll be able to find that the information is almost identical from on all those sites about what a vaccine is and it does. Those are trusted sources. Then Andrew talked about the amen culture. You've never lost that humor we had when we were in medical school all those years back. You've just given me a new word, but the amen culture cost us a lot here in Zambia. Like I said, I can't comment about Uganda. I can only comment about Zambia. Among the evangelicals and the Pentecostals, there was resistance or hesitancy, let me put it, hesitancy to vaccination against COVID, and a lot was spread. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of bishops, we lost a lot of pastors, we lost a lot of our church members who could perhaps be with us today if they had taken the vaccine. Later on, there was a massive turnaround by the entire evangelical and Pentecostal churches, and they all supported vaccination. And Zambia is one of the first countries that reached 80% COVID-19 vaccination coverage. Among the target groups, we reached 80%, one of the first ones, because we had leadership from the national authorities and also the church turned around. So to us right now in Zambia, yes, we still get a few cases of COVID, but they're really off the radar, but that turned around. But I also felt, and this is a tongue-in-cheek comment, I wish some of our evangelical and other people who spread these rumors would go and apologize to the families who lost their relatives, not that they would come up, because perhaps some of those people will be with us today if they had taken the vaccine when it was available. The other thing also that I would say is that some of the people, or many people who spread that, tend to do that out of sheer ignorance, and others also are making money. Let me give an example. If you want to have many likes on your on your site, whether it is YouTube, all you need to do is to talk about something about the vaccine, false information, and also mention the name Bill Gates. The moment you do that, all the gullible, clueless, and whatever people will quickly run to that website because you've mentioned the name Bill Gates, because people have come and said all sorts of things. Recently, there was a clip running, and I'm diverting a little bit on the infodemic, about President Ruto talking about digital IDs in Kenya. And he talked about using biometrics like the iris and fingerprints so that you don't need to carry this card anymore. Then somebody got a snippet from that speech, also got a snippet from Bill Gates talking to a reporter and saying that, you know, there are these things we can just inject in the veins of children and it will be taken. And so somebody said, you see, what President Ruto is saying and what Bill Gates are saying are the same thing. President Ruto talked about iris and fingerprints. This other clip talked about the fact that Bill Gates was talking about injecting something. There's nothing in President Ruto's speech, at least the snippet I saw, that had talked about injecting anybody with something to identify them. So what I would just say, that as a Christian, when you see things like this, sit down and listen carefully and debunk. For example, my own experience with the Wahome Ngari thing. One morning I woke up and on my WhatsApp, there were 4 people who had asked me, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Including my own son. And I said, if my son is concerned about this, then I need to sit down, listen, and write. And when I listened, I was able to debunk a lot of what that was. So before you forward such a thing, make sure you've listened to it yourself and are convinced it is worth sharing. We can stop the infodemic, especially among Christians, if we do not forward things unless we are sure that they will add value to the discussion or will promote the kingdom. And frankly, it will not be a lie. If you read in the book of Revelation, the Bible says the lake of fire is prepared for liars. I hope none of us falls in that category. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Nathan, for that response and for really educating us. I feel like iron is sharpening iron here. So as Nathan has said, when you see something online, ask yourself 3 questions. What is being said? Who is saying it? Why are they saying it? The world of medical misinformation is extremely profitable. Between the years of 2020 and 2022, just 4 organizations that were promoting COVID misinformation, and between them $118 million. This is highly profitable stuff. So as you're forwarding those videos and clicking on them, you are generating advertising revenue, and somebody is laughing all the way to the bank. While here in the global south, people are dying for preventable diseases because they saw somebody in the global north making claims that were not substantiated. So let us not follow this amen culture of just believing whatever we hear. Let's be like the Bereans and double check. What is being said? Who is saying it? Why are they saying it? Eugene Ochaya, you have your hand up. Feel free to ask a question.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Please
Hello?
proceed. You're loud and clear.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, I joined here from came across the tweet by Sabrina, and actually this is a topic that I find so much interesting, actually, because we are the age of information and science, but still people use the negative side to put off others. So I have a request, but I don't know if I can comment a little bit about the misinformation, or I just put my question and that is it. Is it fine?
Oh, please, you want to ask a question?
I have a question, but then I have to comment a little bit about the misinformation.
So why don't you start with a question?
Oh,
Then
the
you can
question.
do the
Okay.
commentary.
Actually,
Yeah.
okay. It's just a request. There are some things that I think it was Nathan who was presenting, and I found them so touching and enlightening. I wish he could recap a little bit briefly. There's when he was covering about the process of testing, how they start from the other side, the actual people who are developing the vaccine, and there are about 3 stages. The double blind, the blinding study. I would like a little bit of recap. Then there was this part where he was talking about certification of the drugs, and he mentioned how Covidex did not make it, I think, to be globally certified, something like that. I happened to miss that. And if he could, I wish he could recap a little bit. Yeah, then I think I'll go with that. Let me leave the other comment. Otherwise, thank you very much. I like the way you have tackled the actual causes why people spread misinformation. Some are ignorant, but others basically money. And we have a predisposition, by the way, to accept conspiracy theories, because if everyone says yes and one person says no, they look unique. We would want to give them an ear. And if you look at the history we had, colonization whatsoever, it just blends in when someone says Bill Gates wants to kill black people. They want to wipe Africa. Population control, ABC. Yeah, but thank you very much.
So Jennifer, if I could jump in, I posted Nathan's talk. So you have the slides in the chat. You can download and go through the vaccine development phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but obviously Nathan can summarize. Just quickly, I know people believe about the white man trying to wipe out Africans. Africa has the world's fastest growing population. We are going to be multiple billions by 2050. Will be the world's youngest population and the world's most populous continent. The youngest continent, populous, and the most populous. And so whoever believes that people are trying to wipe out Africa, that is clearly failed. And also, why are we so focused on the white man when he who is in us is greater than who is in the world? Nathan, you want to summarize or respond to what Eugene was asking?
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I'm managing 2 screens. So I just want to repeat very slowly the phases of vaccine development. Briefly, first of all, the antigen or that component of the organism that you think will elicit a reaction is first tested in animals, which have similar, whose biology is similar to ours. And when they see a reaction, then they say, okay, let's move this to phase 1, which is given to a small number of volunteers in the most of the time in the country where it is being manufactured. Although Andrew has talked about doing HIV vaccine trials in Uganda, but usually it is in that country to assess its safety, confirm that what they saw in the animal is also happening in the human being, and also try to determine what would be the right dose. And like I said, this is usually done in young, healthy, adult volunteers in the country most of the time where this is being done. In phase 2, they again get more volunteers. Again, it is volunteers. You sign a paper and say that I'm volunteering to do this. I understand it could go wrong. I could even die in the process. So you sign. So it's informed volunteers, not people who are not aware, to further assess its safety and ability to generate an immune response. Now here, they also have what we call a comparator. So you have some people who have volunteered to get the product. There are also a group of volunteers who've agreed to get the comparator, something almost similar to what the vaccine is, except that antigen is not there, all right? Then there are usually multiple trials of this to evaluate various age groups and different formulations. So they may try the same product in this age group, in another setting, in a different age group. Then they say, can we formulate it using these components in this one and so on? So multiple things are done. But at the end of it, they compare the group that received and the group that did not receive. They have very clear protocols, what it is they are looking for, looking at the immune reaction. Now, once this is done, they then give it to thousands of volunteers, very many this time, and compared to a similar group of people who did not get a vaccine but received the comparator, to see if it is effective against the disease it is designed to protect against, and to study its safety in a much larger people. So the phase 3 trial is done actually in a place where the people are exposed to that disease you are trying to control, not exposed deliberately, but exposed in nature. And then they continue to study that. And once they collect that information, they show that actually this is efficacious, it is safe, it can also be implemented, and this is the dose. And then they prepare what we call a dossier. A dossier really is a file showing all these different things, and then they put it. Now, what I've just said is an oversimplification. It's much more complex than that, but that is roughly what happens. And so once they have done that, then they bring that file to WHO. We have a team of experts who review the file and then agree that what you've pointed out is actually true. This product will protect at this level. Are we willing to go with a product that protects at 50, at 60, at 80, at 90? You do all these cost-benefit studies and say, okay, we recommend it. And here, because I did most of my public health in malaria, I'm much more familiar with the malaria vaccine than any other. Then you say, okay, we can roll it out. Then that data is presented to the NDA and the NITA, which is the National Immunization Technical Advisory Group, which my sister Sabrina is more familiar with. They review and say, based on what we know about the disease burden in Uganda and what it causes us, I think this is a vaccine we have to roll out. However, as we roll out, we'll continue monitoring its efficacy, its safety, report on the side effects, so that if the side effects are dangerous and many, then we report to the manufacturer, maybe there is something that can be adjusted about it, or even withdraw the vaccine. Some of them have been done. So that is what happens. So even if a vaccine was approved 30 years ago, we are still monitoring it to this day because some of the effects may come out much later. So roughly, that is how it is done. So the certification which you asked about is, we call it pre-qualification at WHO level. So when you receive WHO pre-qualification, it means that that vaccine can be used among human beings in a particular context where that particular condition is found. So that is how the process is. I hope I've answered my question, but what I've said is actually in that slide deck that Andrew just shared. Back to you.
Excellent. And so as Nathan has said, this is a very rigorous process. I have participated in guideline development at the World Health Organization, and I can assure you it's a very rigorous process. In science, we don't go by Gundi said, therefore we believe. We want you to show your work. You don't just give us the answer. We want to see the steps from A to Z. And so you don't just wake up and say, I mixed 2 herbs together and you drop them in your nose and they cure COVID. Nope. We want to see all the steps from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, rigorously tested in a randomized trial before something can be approved as a vaccine. The reality with human nature is that fear hits the brain before facts. And so we tend to panic and believe what we are told. So Nathan will go through hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of clinical trial participants, develop a vaccine, and people reject it in favor of a herb they found somebody selling on the street, which they will take with no evidence. That's a sad reality of human nature. All right, Eugene, you said you had a commentary. Did you finish with a commentary before we move on?
Yeah, actually, what I did was I tried to wrap it up after the question. I did not want to take much time, but I was just talking about the misinformation. It's ignorance, money motivated. Then, of course, we have this white man thing because of the history. It makes sense when someone just comes and says, yeah, they still want to kill you. They want to wipe the continent. Bill Gates wants to kill kids. These are things, we make these videos, but of course, I'm a bit enlightened and I just know it's bullshit. I appreciate the effort science puts in. I know vaccines
language,
take about
language.
Oh, Sorry, I'm sorry. I know it is useless, and I appreciate the time the scientists put in, because the average vaccine takes, is it about 8 years to approve? So if you really look at that, people are not playing. People are putting in the work, and besides, we are predisposed to believe conspiracy theory. You know, if you understand evolutionary psychology, from where we came from, evolving to where we are today, we survived on conspiracy theories in one way or another when we are living in small groups as families, you know. So today it still makes sense when someone says they against us.
Right.
Otherwise, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eugene. Just to say, as a brief aside, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was founded in 1994, and they have been involved in global health for 30 years. A lot has been said about them that's negative, particularly within Christian circles. It's a little sad that we serve a God who cares for the orphan, the widow, the refugee, and who says, let the little children come to me. And so we attack the billionaire who uses his money to help the poor, and yet support those who keep the money to themselves. It's just sad. In winding up, I wanted to broaden this out, Nathan and Sabrina. I think part of the resistance to vaccines in the church also stems from a misunderstanding of medicines in general. We hear people being told, you have been healed, therefore stop taking your medicine. There's no biblical basis for that. God heals through multiple ways. Jesus spat, he used clay, he commanded some people to get well, he touched others. And so to think that there's only one way that God heals is not biblically based. Could you talk to us about general perceptions of medicine and some of the beliefs that we hold as Christians that are not biblically based as we close this out? Sabrina?
Thank you very much. I like the fact that you started with how Jesus healed through various means. And I usually tell my patients and clients that God works through us as doctors to support the healing. And I also want to say at this point that healing is not just physical healing, but it is also emotional and mental healing. That a person may be physically well, but may be emotionally traumatized or even have a mental illness. And a lot of these misinfodemics comes from people who may be disgruntled by various reasons, and they are pulling a crowd towards them and trying to influence people's way of thought through, for example, saying, don't take this, don't take that, because the government, because they want to kill us. I like what Eugene said about conspiracy, that people drive conspiracy theories to create doubt. And fear is the beginning of not believing. Let us not be afraid. Let us be comforted to know that God has our back, that God cares, and that He uses healthcare providers to provide healing. And by the way, regarding medicine, there's no single medicine that doesn't have a side effect. Even the paracetamol that people take on a daily basis for various forms of pain does have some side effects. So too much of anything is always bad. But just going back to our vaccination, remember in Uganda, every single year, 1.3 million babies are born. And on day one of being born, the children are given BCG vaccine, polio zero. And imagine if those vaccines that are given to 1.3 million babies were defunct. We would be losing so many children to vaccines. So vaccines have to be carefully developed and safe so that large populations that are receiving them do not die. But also, as vaccines are developed from the factory in Japan or in India or in the US, they have to get into the person. The vaccine has to get into the arm of that child when it is still safe. So the logistical movement of the vaccine and making sure that it is maintained at the temperature through which it was manufactured until it gets into the arm of a child is so important. It takes a lot of good governance. It takes a lot of zero tolerance to corruption. It takes a lot of dedication and every person doing their part to ensure that whatever gets into the arm of a child is safe and efficacious. If, for example, a nurse in Kotido or Kabira Maido leaves the vaccine vials on the bench and they lose their efficacy, then that nurse is not supporting the process. So we each have to do our part. As parents, we have to do our part by taking our children for vaccination and trust the health system. And in trusting the health system, us as Christians, we have to do the right thing. Even if everyone else is doing the wrong thing, endeavor to do the right thing. Because you know that you're saving a life, you're ensuring that this child will survive and grow up to reach their fullest potential. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Let me add my voice to that. Andrew, I think this would sound Mujugira-ish. In God we trust, all the rest must give data. All right?
Amen. Amen.
That is Mujugira-ish. Okay. But having said that, in Zambia here, we have a group which does not accept vaccines or any medicines, any Western medicine. And there are pockets of that around Zambia and also Zimbabwe. As a result, we are now having a roaring outbreak in both Zambia and in Zimbabwe. And when you check where it is coming from, a lot of the cases are coming from those groups that refuse vaccines. In fact, we've had situations where outbreaks have occurred and teams have even gone to search to do the case investigation and come to those homes and found people are not vaccinated, and even they have lost children and have hidden and denied that anybody died and so on. So we are having people, so this is, I think it's called the apostolic faith. We call it Mapostole here in our local lingua. And that is a problem, and we can't force them to have it, but we're having these outbreaks that we have to put out fires all the time because of this group that is resisting vaccination. So like my sister Sabrina said, I think I also subscribe to the same school of thought. God heals through many ways, and people should be encouraged to say that these Western medicines, a lot of them were developed by actually Christians who prayed to God and said, Lord, could you give us a solution to this thing? And God gave them a solution and they're able to do it. So it becomes very sad when you see the same Christians in the same, saying that we cannot use this, and yet it was God who gave that wisdom to that person and so on. So I do want to believe that I think we have a lot more work to do and to educate the people who are vaccine or medicine hesitant, using as many means as possible. Force is not one of them, but coming down to their level and trying to simplify things. I appreciate my sister, Dr. Sabrina, very much, because she's learned the art of simplifying things when she's explaining them, maybe because she talks to a lot of adolescents and young people. But so, Dr. Sabrina Chitaka, thank you so much for the simple way you say things. When I grow up, I want to be like you. Back to you, Andrew.
I second that. Sabrina is excellent at social media communication. So Sabrina, question in the chat, malaria vaccines, and the perception that somehow because we are vaccinating, we're rolling out the HPV vaccination, that cervical cancer is becoming more prevalent. Could you address those two issues?
All right. I was just chatting in the chat, and also I'd like to say thank you very much to Nathan and Andrew. Communication is something we all have to learn, and simplifying it to the level of talking to your P3 child that all of us should understand. So I appreciate the comment. Now, HPV vaccine is one of the strategies towards eliminating cervical cancer. Just like we have in HIV the 95-95-95 strategy for elimination of cervical cancer, we have at least 90% of all the girls in the world should be vaccinated by the age of 15. 70% of women should be screened for cervical cancer from the age of 35. That means doing a pap smear. And ladies, if you're in this room and you have not had your pap smear in the last 3 years, please go and get screened. The trouble is, many people fear to get screened and maybe they don't have access, all those things. But the last 90 is for people who have suspicious lesions on their cervix, they must get treatment. So it is not true that the more we give HPV vaccination, we are seeing more cervical cancer. Perhaps it's because more and more women are being screened and they are getting diagnosed and then treated. We are going to see the benefits of HPV vaccination if we vaccinate universally in the next 20 years, just like the benefits were seen in Australia, where they are no longer seeing any woman with cervical cancer. Now, to the malaria vaccine. We know that malaria continues to kill so many children, so many adolescents, and now even adults. Malaria has continued to cause pain in our populations. And so we need a multi-pronged intervention to prevent or eradicate malaria. The best one, of course, would be to kill the mosquitoes. But remember, mosquitoes are eaten by lizards. So you cannot kill all the mosquitoes in the country. So you have to quickly test and treat if you think it's malaria, cut away all the bushes, ensure that you do indoor spraying, all those things. And so bringing the vaccine as part of the arsenal in this fight against malaria is a walk into the right direction. That the vaccine is going to be given to children below the age of 5 because they are the ones that are most affected. That doesn't mean that if the vaccine for malaria comes, that all the other things will be stopped. When the vaccine for malaria comes, it does not mean you'll stop spraying your house. It does not mean that if you get a fever, you'll not go and get tested. But I want to reassure the naysayers that the malaria vaccine has been tested. It has now been rolled out in 5 countries in Africa. I think Nathan could correct me. But the vaccine is safe, most importantly. So back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Sabrina. For many of us who have cared for babies with malaria, children with malaria, we have those sad memories of the babies we couldn't save. We lose about 400,000 people every year to malaria. We need multiple strategies because the mosquitoes are changing and adapting. Some are now insecticide resistant. So vaccines just come to complement what we already use, bed nets and other strategies. I know there's controversy about GMO mosquitoes. We won't have the time to get into that since we are up. It's time. So I'd like to thank you, Sabrina and Nathan, for sharing your expertise and time. And thank you very much, Brethren, for staying on and for participating in this informative discussion. Let iron continue to sharpen iron. And let us, as Paul says in Ephesians, walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. With that, brethren, I thank you and wish you a happy week and blessed weekend. And we'll see you next month for the Focus Breakfast. General Secretary, General Secretary, did you have any announcements before we close?
No, not really, Dr. Andrew. Just to appreciate Dr. Sabrina and Dr. Nathan for the well-researched information shared, and also to appreciate members for turning through. People perish due to lack of ignorance, says the Bible. So this is free information that it was
Lack of-
available to us. Thank
Lack
you
of
very
knowledge,
much.
sir. Thank you very much. God bless everybody, and goodbye.
Bye.
And we say amen.
Amen.
So much for the opportunity.
Amen indeed.
Bye.
Bye.